Hello everybody, I'm AskMatt13 and today we're going to be going through some Spring Major Power Rankings. We're going to be going through all 16 teams, and before we get started, I will have a quick note here. Basically, I'm ranking these teams based on their current form, but also taking into account how teams play at the Major. As in, some teams are better than others on land due to factors like getting nervous, there's a crowd, so playing into the crowd, or getting nervous because of the crowd. Just in general, the ping difference as well, low ping, all that plays a role. No ping really, because you're all playing on a dedicated wired-in server. But anyway, so yeah, keep that in mind as I'm going forward. This is not my predictions. I already did a predictions video. Which, speaking of that, check out my last video. And if you're interested in more videos like this, you can subscribe to get more content. I'm going to be doing a players ranking later on. Very low percentage, like 2-3% of my viewers are subscribed, so make sure to subscribe if you want to see more. And yeah, without further ado, I'll just get into the rankings. I'm starting off with Elevate at 16. I don't think this will be a surprise to many. Elevate is one of my favorite teams, so it's kind of sad to have to put him down here, but despite having a pretty promising introduction as a team where they're pulling in Virtuoso from Europe, Kami from Australia, all paired together with Realize, who's one of the most famous and probably the best player native to APAC. Everyone knows Realize. This team was promising at the start. Everyone thought they'd be good. There were some people, myself included, I was hopeful anyway, people thought they might be a threat at majors for the first time out of APAC. But there hasn't been a reality, and in fact in the winter split they didn't even make the major. Gaming Gladiators proved too much of a competition. And they're back, and they are the best team in APAC now, pretty clearly this split anyway, but they still are the weakest team here at the major. And although I like to think they could take a game, definitely, I think the odds of them taking it serious are practically zero, unfortunately. But one day an APAC team will win. I don't think it's going to be this major. Alright, moving right along. Well, that puts Elevate at 16. Moving right along, we got Power at 15. Now, I think a lot of people have Ground Zero over Power, the other OCE team. But I think this Australian team's just a tad weaker. I think Power, although they have the LAN experience, they've looked much weaker than Ground Zero in region. Across the season as well. Now, if you look, a lot of people will note that Power and Ground Zero might end up playing for a world spot at this event. I think if you look at how they've looked in region, Ground Zero has been clearly the better team. Ground Zero's only been around for 2 splits. They formed after fall split, and in winter and spring alone, they managed to match Power, but around the same level of points. Such that this major, does serve as a world's play-in. And the fact that that's happened, despite Power having all 3 splits under their belt, just goes to show you how better Ground Zero's been in these last couple splits. They've closed the gap, and I think they're looking like the better team. They beat Power in the most recent regional. I think they're the favorites, and if that matchup does happen, which is pretty likely unless one of them beats a North American team, and as you can tell where I'm putting Power, I don't think that's very likely to happen. Although it could. I don't want to underrate these Australian teams. I think they are a tier above Elevate in that respect. They're going to be taking games. They definitely could take a series. I just think it's pretty unlikely. But when they do, if they do, I should say, play each other, I think Ground Zero would come on top, and that's why I'm putting Power at 15. And now I've kind of revealed this by talking about it, but my very next team is going to be Ground Zero. I think they're good. I think Power's good, but I do think this is a very tough competition in this major, and they're going to be 2 of the bottom teams. Well, except for the fact that, based on the bracket, that if they are 2 of the bottom teams, they're forced to play each other. So one will get 9th, 12th. And I think that will be Ground Zero. But in terms of power rankings, if these teams were playing each other, the way I think of power rankings, by the way, I said that note earlier, but it's kind of like if these teams played 100 series, who would come out on top? And then just kind of ordering them in the order I think they would beat each other if they had, some theoretical world where you could play 100 series without the drain of playing 100 series, Point being, who's just the better team in terms of talent? There's no upset potential, stuff like that. So that's where I put Ground Zero. And now we're starting to get a bit of a list here, but I'll move right along to 13 is Ninjas and Pajamas. Now, I think a lot of people think of this as one of the stronger teams in SAM, potentially stronger than Crew, but I don't think they're stronger than Crew, and I think the last regional showed that. Ninjas and Pajamas got bracket reset by Crew and then lost the bracket reset. So they came in from from uppers, and they lost twice to Crew. I just think they're going to be the weaker SAM team at the region. I know there's a history sometimes of the second seed at SAM performing, and Ninjas in Pajamas is that old the club core, so they do have a lot of LAN experience, and they're bringing in Mata, who's a fresh hot rookie. I think Mata's going to do great. At the same time, though, I do think they're going to be one of the weaker teams in this major just because of how stacked it is, and I think Crew looks clearly a step above, even with Mata. Crew's been looking a step above Ninjas in Pajamas, and I think that reflects in the rankings. Now, could NIP beat, a North American or European team? Definitely. Their first game's Optic. I think that's a great chance for them to make a statement and get their first win. But I do think that I would favor Optic in that series, and I do think that Ninjas in Pajamas are 13 on my list. Now, if we were doing tiers, there would be another tier gap here, which just goes to show you how far OC has fallen. They used to be a lot better than they're looking right now. They could totally do well in this major and make me eat my words, but I do think that there's a tier gap here. So I would have, Ninjas in Pajamas is, amongst the teams that could do well, as it were. Yeah. So moving right along, the next team will come in at 12, and I have Genji Mobile One Racing. Now, I do think Genji's great, and I think that they've clearly, they won the fall major, and we're not that far removed. The reason I have them so low is they just had a really rough spring split. The winter major didn't go their way either, and since then, it's not that they've looked bad, but they've had uncharacteristic losses. They lost the Shopify Rebellion, and yes, it was a best of 5 series, but it was in the lower bracket in the Spring Cup. And they lost, and their splits, they've had some great wins. They beat Complexity, but at the same time, then they'll take losses like the G2, teams that, if they really were going to win this major or do well, they shouldn't be losing to a team like G2. And G2's not even a bad team. It's just that if Genji is going to do well in the major, they've got to do better, because Europe looks to be getting better and better, and North America is trying to match that, and Genji almost got left behind. They had to play a tiebreaker against FaZe to even make it. And I know everyone thinks FaZe is good. I agree. I think FaZe is good, and it was a good win for Genji to send them in here. But FaZe had a really bad event, that last event, and I think that their mentality going into this series against Genji was a little bit chopped. So I think Genji just scraped into the major, and that's why I have them so low. But it's funny because even over some of the teams above Genji in the power rankings, I think that if Genji had a pop-off day, they could actually win the event, which is unlike some of the other teams, which is an easy thing to say because they've obviously won one before. So we know what their peak is. I think that they're not going to be playing at their peak this event. All right, moving right along, we'll go to 11. I have Moist Esports. Now, I do like Moist. I like Cash. I think he's a great player, and he has a solid teammate in Joyo and another solid teammate in Juicy. But I think Juicy's looked a little bit weaker this split. I think that the fact that they were sitting waiting on Hogan Mode, and I know Hogan Mode had to win the whole event and then play a tiebreaker, but the fact that Moist was sitting waiting on other results to lock in their spot just goes to show that they were a little bit behind the other top European teams who locked in their spot earlier that event and weren't sitting and waiting. And I think Moist, although they're good, and just like some of the teams I mentioned below, they could have a deep run if they popped off. I just feel like if everyone's popping off, or if no one's popping off, if they're at even footing with the other team, I think they would not do as well, especially with Juicy, who hasn't really proven himself too much on LAN. They had that amazing fall run, but I think Juicy's really got to show what he's made of, and that he can. That's what it takes to stick around at the top level. And all these teams past this in this next tier with NiP and above could easily show me wrong and show how great they are. And I would, if any of you players do have been watching this, prove me wrong. I think it would be great to see you guys do well. But I do think that I think that it's just a tough major, and this is where I put him. I put him at 11. All right. Moving right along, these are some heavy-hitting names, big names, going down so low, but it's just because of how stacked we are here. Next, I have Optic. Now, this is probably my favorite team this whole season. I just love the way Magic Bears gelled in the squad, and the fact that they turned around from when Magic Bear almost got kicked to still, play well and somehow make this major in 3rd seed in North America. It's just been an incredible story, but I think on paper they are a bit weaker than some of the teams, even that they're rated above. in North America, I mean. And I just think that they definitely could pop off. And in my prediction bracket, which, by the way, I have another video out of prediction bracket if you're interested, I had them doing well, and I think they will do well. But that's like a little bit of hope because I know it would have to take some upset victories to get there. And that's what I think. I think it's an upset. I think they're in the lower half of this of the teams in terms of talent. I think they're playing well. They're on a hot streak, and if they can keep that going and they can ride the crowd, they can definitely go far. I hope to see them in the crowd. I'm going to be at the Boston Majors, so I'm really hoping they make top 8. So prove me wrong, Optic. All right. That brings us to number 9. I have Crew. Now, I was a bit surprised when I was putting this together, and I couldn't really see myself putting Crew higher because I rate Sam pretty highly. But I think that just goes to show you that there are 2 other Sam teams just happening to play for NA in NA League. So if you think about it that way, then I think Sam's doing quite fine. But in terms of the actual South American League, I don't know if they'll do great. I definitely think they could make a deep run, Crew. But with Drufino carrying them, he's like really good. They're all really good, but especially Drufino. But it's just they have a tough bracket draw, and they're in a tough major in general. But their bracket also is pretty rough. And I just think that there's some really talented rosters that would just be favored in any straight up matchup anyway, even if they didn't have a bad bracket draw. I think they're right around this midpoint. They could go far, but it would take an upset win, kind of like some of the teams I mentioned before. But at least, and again, all these teams in this tier and like nipping above, they have that upset swing. That there is that like 10%, maybe 20% chance, depending on who they're playing. That chance they win. And Crew, by the way, the reason I have them above some of these other teams is they did so well at the last major. Made a top 8. And they've looked great in region. Like I said, they bracket, reset, nip. They had a really crazy loss to, I think, a team I hadn't heard of called Timeless. But they've since that loss, they went and did a whole lower bracket run, won the whole regional. I think they're looking good. They're coming in on a hot streak, and it could continue. We'll just have to see. All right, now this brings us to our top 8. And again, this is not how I necessarily think the top 8 will be at the major, but this is how I would put the top 8 in terms of skill. And I have Rule 1 as that, rounding out the top 8. I think Rule 1 is quite good. Everybody knows the Twins are amazing, Clears and RW9. And I think they're going to show it at this event. I don't think they're going to go on a Falcons-esque top 2 run, but I do think that this Rule 1 team is legit. I think they're going to do well at the major. And I think it helps them that they are backed by a North American org, by Sunless Khan's Rule 1, because they're probably going to have a lot of fans in this Boston major. They might be able to ride that crowd. I think Falcons similarly had a lot of people cheering for them just because they were the underdogs. And I think with Rule 1, not only will they be underdogs if they're playing some of the top teams, not only will they be underdogs, but they're also going to have that, fandom, like almost like they're a North American team, just because they have a North American org backing them. Yeah, and I think that they look clearly better than Falcons this split. By the way, just to talk a little bit about me now. The fact that Falcons got 3rd in region should tell you something. And I just feel like Rule 1 is looking clear going into this event and also Worlds later. So we'll see how they do. They could definitely get higher than 8th. They could also get lower. They have the previous team. They have Crew here at 9. This is their first match. I have 8-9. I think that might be one of the closest first round matchups, even based on my power rankings. I definitely think that. So we'll see how they do, how they play, because it's gonna be revealing for sure. All right, moving right along. I got Complexity at 7. Now this is a bit higher than their NA counterpart Optic. That Optic did better in the split in terms of points, but I think it's just that Complexity has that LAN experience. They've done top 4 at LAN before, they've gotten top 8 at LAN before, and they also have the fact that they won one of the last regionals despite having an up and down split. They had a really bad cup, Spring Cup, but then they followed that up with although not an incredible invitational. They beat version 1 in a very tense match to qualify for, or to likely qualify for the major, and then it ended up knocking V1 out of contention. So I think they're quite good. I think Raze Bull can carry them far again, but in terms of talent, I would put them 7. So if they do get like another top 4 run, I think that would require a couple upsets, but they're definitely good enough. I think this might be a tier break from the teams below. like into a top 7 tier that could, any of these top 7 teams could win the whole thing. Like I could see Complexity winning the whole event. It would be unlikely, but it's definitely possible. And they're probably one of these first teams that has that true chance, like a greater than 10% chance. Maybe that's too high. Yeah, that would be too high. If they were playing in the grand final, they would have a greater than 10. Man, that's a poor way to put it. I don't know the numbers. Point being, you think whatever you think realistic. I think they can realistically win it all, and all the teams above as well. All right. So now this list is starting to fill out, and it is interesting. But I think that this is pretty accurate. I think you might want to flip a few of these, but perhaps besides Genji, some people might put Genji higher. I think this would be similar to a lot of people's lists if you're trying to balance how the last split went with how these teams perform on LAN. Alright, up next is Space Station. Now, in some ways this is quite high for 3 players that many wouldn't individually rate that high, but at the same time, they have looked amazing as a team, and they're coming in as a number 1 team in North America. So this is a little bit low if you're thinking in terms of that, like the number 1 team in North America, and here they are at 6. But I think Space Station has a lot to prove this LAN, to prove that this split wasn't a fluke. They didn't win a regional though, and I know Arsenal is hungry to win a regional. He's talked about it, and with LJ and Hoxer beside him, I think they could do quite well. But I think that some of these other top teams, especially the top teams in Europe, as we're getting near the end of this list, you can already tell it's a little bit lopsided here. EU at the top, a little top heavy, but I think Space Station could get some upsets and could go far. They're quite good as a squad. And that the number 1 seed was not a fluke. They deserve to be the number 1 seed in NA. Alright, moving right along to number 5, I have Liquid. I think Liquid's quite good. Some people were telling me in the comments of my last video I should have had Liquid higher. And for a prediction video, I agree they definitely could be a lot higher, because here, I think in terms of talent, they are top 5 in the major. But I had some upset losses. I think a lot of these teams, up to maybe my top 2, you'll see who they are later. I think everyone potentially below that top 2, maybe top 3, could get upset. Actually, everyone below the top 2 could get upset in the first couple of rounds. First round especially, even. And I think Liquid is going to have a tough first match. They're playing Complexity, another team I have in my top 8. So I could see that despite being so high in terms of power ranking, how they could do worse at the major if they get a bad draw. But they are quite good. It's how Oski, Chronic, they're all incredible players, and they have that LAN experience at this point, so they're no longer the LAN rookies that they were, and they could go far. I personally feel like they're going to go far either in the major or in Worlds, but maybe they do both. I think they're going to have a top 4 in one of those 2 events. Alright, moving right along, we have Team BDS at number 4. I do think BDS has looked a step above Liquid in the last, in this split across all 3 regionals. They did have a, I think, tied record against Liquid, but BDS hasn't lost to any of those like lesser teams in the EU, whereas Liquid was losing to Hogan Mode. And don't get me wrong, Hogan Mode's a good team. I think pretty clearly the 6th best team in the EU, but Liquid should not be losing that match against Hogan Mode, and yet they did. So I think that BDS is a little less upsettable. I think they would win more matches against Liquid, although it would be quite close. Like the odds would be pretty close, 50-50, but I would favor BDS. And I think they're going to do well at this major as well. I am a fan of BDS, so in case you think there's any bias away, I'll freely admit it. I am a BDS fan, but I do think that they are quite talented, and I put them right about this number 4 spot. I think they could overperform. I believe in my predictions I did have them higher than 4th, so they could easily overperform us a bit, get an upset here or there. Yeah, this is about where I put them. A really good team. I think Rise made the team a lot better. I love Extra, so it's kind of sad to see him on the bench. I think he's still good enough to be playing, and I hope next season he finds a team. But it's pretty undeniable that Rise kind of was what this team needed to get back on top. Maybe potentially repeat as world champs. Now, as these power rankings are saying, I don't necessarily think they will repeat as world champs, but it's definitely possible, especially this high, to win the event and the next event's world, so we'll see what happens. Alright, nearly done. We're on to our top 3 here, so it's no secret that the teams I have left are Vitality, Carmine Corp, and Furia, and All three of these teams are amazing, but I'm just putting what I think, the order I think they would, you know, if they were playing, as I said, like 100 games, 100 series against each other, who would be favored. So next up is Furia. Uh, it's been a pretty dominant split from Europe. I think Europe is the favorite at this major, not just, the individual European teams, but Europe. If you had to put odds, it would be pretty high odds on Europe to win the event, but not 100. I think if any team could do it, it's Furia. I mean, beat Vitality and Carbon Corp is what I'm getting at, because they have a lot of LAN experience. They've beaten Moist on LAN. Back when it was, Rise, Troyo, Vatira, the incredible Moist major winners. And I know this is a different Furia, but it's a better Furia. After they added Lost, they looked a little shaky winter, but here comes spring. This is the Furia we've been waiting on. They didn't get one seed in NA, but they ended strong with the regional win. And I think they're going to pop off this LAN. They're a LAN team. They know how to play on LAN. Card, so experienced, King Card, as CJ puts it. And I think they're going to do well. I think they would do well against most teams on LAN. So I have them at 3. This might be one of my wildest predictions, but I don't even think it's that wild. I think they could be. I think they can hang with the top of EU, if not be they wouldn't be the favorites, but they can definitely hang, and I think they're right in the mix, in that mix. Yeah. So now, without further ado, we're right here at the end. There's only 2 teams left, and I'm not. I'm not gonna pull off any surprises. I think the next team is Karmi Corp, and they are quite good. But I think Vitality's just been a step above. But that said, the Karmi Corp's here at number 2. They could easily win the major if Vitality does have a shaky major, because it is Zen's first LAN, like international LAN. So if Zen has a shaky LAN, then Karmi Corp is not going to have a shaky event. I think they're right there. So they could easily be the favorite out of day 1 if Zen looks shaky. Or Vitality as a whole looks shaky. And I think that they're just the strongest. I think Vatira has this desire to win that I don't really see out of a lot of players, and that really shows up on LAN. So I expect Karmi Corp to go far, and if they do lose, I expect it to be around top 4. It would kind of be shocking to me if they got worse than top 4. But yeah, and they could win the whole thing. I really don't see them getting worse than 4th, and that's why I put them at 2nd. They've looked really good in Europe, and Europe's looked like a really tough region to be good in. Alright. Last but not least, I have Vitality. I think they're the number 1 seed in the major for a good reason. I think everyone knows how good Vitality is after they've won the Triple Crown in Europe, and which Europe is looking like the best region. They are the clear favorites, and that is despite Zen being a LAN rookie. He hasn't played in international LAN, and I could easily see Zen struggling. Well, not easily. Let me rephrase that. There's a chance he struggles just because he hasn't played in international LAN before. There's a chance they get billed as the villains. It is a major in Boston. It's going to be a mostly American, mostly North American crowd. And they could potentially, not even because of anything Vitality's done, because I actually don't think any of the players have been, none of them have been toxic. They haven't been this kind of gloating. They haven't gloated, none of that. So there's nothing they've done that would make them the villains, but sometimes, and I've said this before, sometimes if you win and they beat someone's favorite team, that's all it takes, and now you're the villain. And I could easily see Vitality being the crowd's villain in this event, especially if they do well. So Zen, it can be tough, that pressure of a crowd. So that's the only way I see. I'm talking about the way Vitality could lose, because if that doesn't happen, Vitality is going to win this event. I think it would take something like that, something like the pressure getting to Zen, or even Radosin, who's pretty new, although he's been in a LAN before. I think it would take something happening to the players' mentality to cause this team to lose. Because if they're on top of their mental, this looks like world champs. These players, they all look like world champs. And I guess that's almost always true of world champion teams and major winning teams. But when you have a player like Radosin, who I usually wouldn't have rated so high, looking like a world champ, then they've leveled up. So we'll see. I think that it's going to be one of the biggest storylines of the major, besides individual team storylines, is to see how every team that plays Vitality, can they be the ones? Can they be the ones to end them, to beat them? And then once you beat them, it's double elim, so Vitality has to be beaten twice to get out of the event. In fact, if any team could win with a bracket reset, I think it's Vitality. I think they could come from the lowers and win a bracket reset. So even if they lose, it's not over for them. And I said I didn't see Karmi Corp getting less than top 4. I don't see Vitality getting less than Grand Finals. I think even if they had a bad event, it would be Grand Finals. Now, that's a pretty bold prediction, since it is Zen's first LAN. And you know, they could be upset early, but I find it very unlikely. I think of all the teams, they're pretty likely to make the grand finals, and I think anything less they wouldn't see as a success. Which, if they made a top 4 or something like that, they should still be proud, but players like them probably won't feel satisfied with that. The good news for them is if that did happen, is that Worlds right around the corner, and they could just prove their worth at Worlds. But I think they are the favorites to win this event. That's why I put them at number 1. So, this is the full list. Let me see if you can see that way. Full list. So definitely let me know if you disagree. This is power ranking, so if you think one team's better than I have it, go all at it. There's no like wiggle room for me this time around. I mean, you know, because this is truly how I think would be in order of like, oh, this team would beat this team, would beat this team. So have at it. Let me know what you thought in the comments. Let me know if you'll be at the major as well. It's gonna be a fun time. I'm excited to be going, and keep on the lookout for a few more videos before the major. I'm gonna do one on player rankings, my top 24 players that I predict will be at the event. And yeah, if you liked the video, drop a like, subscribe. Other than that, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.